ask you a question. If you decided tomorrow that you wanted to sell your business, would anyone actually want to buy it? Not your best client, not your best friend, not your kids, a real buyer with real money. Here's why I'm asking. I once worked with a business owner who had built something beautiful, profitable, great reputation, a solid business. But then life threw her a curveball and something happened. Her business couldn't run without her, and no one wanted to buy it. Today's guest has seen this story hundreds of times. Cameron Bishop has spent decades buying and selling companies, over 50 deals, hundreds of millions of dollars. And he says nearly 80% of businesses that try to sell never do. Not because they're bad businesses, but because they're built in a way no buyer wants. In this episode, we're talking about what actually makes a business sellable. What do buyers want? And while waiting too long can cost you everything. And how to build a business that gives you options, even if you never plan to sell. If your business is your retirement plan, if your name is on everything, if you can't take a real vacation without answering the phone 10 times, you need this conversation. Let's get into it. Welcome to Main Street Success Stories. I'm your host, Jennifer Koch, entrepreneur, business coach, and founder of Next Wave Business Coaching. My first business I opened 2 days before giving birth to my second daughter. But then I grew it for 20 years. I grew it from a local bakery into a national brand and eventually sold it for a profit. I know firsthand how tough the odds can be. Only 1 out of 2 small businesses make it to year 5. That's why I'm passionate about helping entrepreneurs change those statistics through coaching, mentoring, and this podcast, where I share real stories of others, their success, their struggle, their mindset shifts, their fears, and lots of wins along the way. Because none of us are alone in this journey of entrepreneurship, and I want to make sure that you have the support you need. My goal is simple: to inspire you, motivate you, and show you there's a path to building a profitable business. So let's dive into the next episode of Main Street Success Stories. I am joined today by Cameron Bishop, who is a managing director at Raincatcher, and I'm really excited to talk about this conversation of how to exit a business profitably, because I believe it's one that doesn't get talked enough. So thank you, Cameron. I'm so thankful for you to be on the show today to share your expertise.
Certainly, Jennifer. I'm very pleased to be here.
So Cameron, give us a little background of how you became an expert in selling businesses.
Well, my career path has been an interesting one and not necessarily planned. Started my career as an advertising copywriter in a small technical publishing company that was owned by a huge international conglomerate. At that time, it was a $7 million business. And about 5 years after I joined that company, they sold us off to the Macmillan Book Publishing Company, and they said, hey, we kind of like this magazine business. And they just said, go out and buy magazines. So that's what we did. No instructions, just go do it. So a lot of times learn by doing is the best way to go. And for me anyway, your failures, you learn more from than you do your successes many times. And first deal I did was a total failure, but we learned so much from that. And our biggest mistake was not in dotting the I's and crossing the T's and doing the financial audits. It was in how to read and understand and hear what the people are saying. So that became sort of our mantra going forward. Over a 23-year career there, we did 40 plus acquisitions, built a company from 7 million to 400 million. And I then decided to go out on my own, wrote a business plan, partnered with JP Morgan Chase Bank's private equity division, and we built another company from 0 to about 120 million. So I've done around 50 site acquisitions, spent about $500 million of private equity money. And it's kind of my passion today because I saw so many business owners make so many mistakes when they were actually selling to us. They had no idea that I could have been paying them a lot more money for their company if they had just taken some proper steps. But of course, I was the buyer. And it wasn't my job to tell them what they were doing wrong, so that I would have to pay them more. Spent 5 years as a partner in a consulting firm working with business owners doing an exit and transition planning, and did a turnaround on a very troubled $60 million charitable company. And that contract ended during COVID. Got very bored. What do I like to do? Well, I like buying and selling companies. So I found Raincatcher. We were very well aligned on mission, vision, values, and the desire to help business owners at the time they wanted to transition out of their business. So I've been a partner and managing director there for 5 years.
Wow, what a wonderful career. And one thing that stood out to me is you've been a builder. You really understand the building process because you've built so many different careers and companies. And I have to believe that is a very strong asset when you're starting to have the conversation with business owners about the opposite of building, and that would be the succession planning, the exit. So take us through a little bit. What does it really mean to be exit ready?
Certainly. So in our business, Raincatcher, we are what's called a lower middle market investment bank. So that means our clients kind of have around 2 million to 10 million in EBITDA profits. And that's a very underserved market because those businesses are too small for big investment banks and too big for the majority of Main Street business brokers. And this is their primary source of generational wealth. Today, most of these business owners are in their baby boomer generation years, and they don't have children that want to come into the business. So they're left with no choice but to sell. So our business is growing rapidly from these owners who need a proper solution and professional representation. So they contact us. We're very digitally marketing savvy, so they find us, and of course we get a lot of referrals. But when we have the conversation with them, it's oftentimes, Jennifer, very sad because I have to tell them that their company simply is not sellable or won't be for another year, 2 years, or 3 years, or even more, based on some of the tactics or strategies that they are either improperly using in their business or that they're not doing at all.
So there's a couple of thoughts there. I do feel like there's a big misconception with business owners who do have family members that they just assume their generations, their children, their grandchildren are going to want in on the business. And like you said, that's not always the case. Or maybe they don't even have somebody who they could pass the business on to. And so you mentioned that a lot of times you see all these mistakes. Is part of the problem that business owners think about the exit too late when they're already hitting their, golden years, retirement years?
Actually, it's worse than that. They don't think about the exit at all.
Well, they're
You
so
know,
busy
it's,
building, right? They're so busy wearing all the hats.
yeah. Uh, our theory is that it's a very human nature thing. Business owners focus on top line revenue, avoiding or minimizing their taxes, and taking home profits, and usually because they're usually S corps or LLCs, distributions at year end. So they spend at least 95% of their time working in their company, and maybe at best 5% of their time working on their company, and they don't even realize that, and they don't understand the difference between the two, and they have no whatsoever of how long it truly takes to position and prepare a company to A, be sellable at all, or B, sell at a peak value.
So, how soon do you recommend business owners start thinking about the exit?
Well, the big picture is I taught a course for the Small Business Administration at a local university. And in the first class we would have, I would say, there's a lot of young company owners, new companies. And I said, you need to build your business from the start with your exit in mind, because every business owner, one way or another, is going to leave their company. And so an exit is going to occur. Now, if they're up and running and established in a perfect world, beginning to think about the exit 5 years in advance gives them the optimum runway to really fine tune the company and have historical performance in place to demonstrate the track record for buyers of the business. Oftentimes we face the challenge of dealing with business owners that literally wake up one day, they're extremely frustrated by something, and they say, that's it, I'm done, it's time to sell. That's the worst case scenario where, again, they're either not going to be sellable or probably not going to be able to get them a maximum value that them to sell their company. So a year is nice. We often see that as a luxury. 2 or 3 years is even better.
Okay, so that's good to think about. So tell us, like, in your opinion, we talk about they're not going to be sellable. Is there some concrete things that you're seeing? Are there some statistics out there that are telling us how many businesses aren't selling? And take us through a few of those key factors of why they're not sellable.
Well, the big picture, yeah, percentage on the metrics of companies that are sellable is pretty surprising. I believe the source of this data was Pepperdine University's business school. I'm not certain of that, but the general metric used is that 80% of companies that try to sell never sell.
Wow.
And many reasons, but there are some pretty consistent fundamental reasons that are huge barriers for business owners to sell and for buyers to buy. So we'll kind of touch on the 5 ones that we hear the most from with interested buyers. So when we're representing a company to sell, we market that business nationally to any kind of strategic buyer for that business, private equity firms, high net worth individuals, family offices. They're called independent sponsors. So we may target marketing to, could be 200, could be 500, could be 1,000 potential buyers. And when they contact us and say, yes, I'd like to know more, we have them sign an NDA, and then we have a video conversation with them. And here are the kinds of questions that we get asked. First, they want to know, does the owner want to sell? And sometimes owners don't really have a compelling answer to that question. So that's the first thing they need to consider. The second question is, well, if they're selling, what do they want to do? Do they want to stay on board and continue to run the company, or do they want to leave? And if so, in what time frame? And then we get into the real detailed parts, and they want to know firm's accounting. And that's the number one problem we see in companies that are unsellable. Many business owners pay very little to no attention in their accounting. They don't use it as a decision-making or strategic planning management tool. They don't even really know often how to read an income statement. And Jennifer, it's amazing how many people can't tell me off the cuff when I ask the question, well, what size of a company are you? They don't know how much their revenue is, and even more, have no idea how much profit they make. So they often are running on, they may be on QuickBooks, but they're functionally running what we refer to as a checkbook accounting business. So they look at their checkbook. If they got enough money in there, they pay their bills. And fortunately for most of them, they have the luxury to have enough money where they can pay their bills and they're making a distribution. If they have any kind of reasonable accounting, they're on what's called a cash basis, which is fine in one sense, but the buyers of companies want to see the financials reported on an accrual basis and hopefully a GAAP accrual basis, because they're going to go out and borrow money to buy this company. They're not going to pay all cash for it. And the banks that they go to require GAAP accrual-based accounting reporting.
What does GAAP stand for?
Generally accepted accounting principles. So
Okay.
it's sort of the standardized way that financials are treated for reporting purposes under all the accounting
Right.
rules and regulations and audit firms.
You know, it's interesting because I have this conversation a lot in my consulting business because I'm working with creative service-based entrepreneurs who want to serve their client, and that's their focus. And they are creative, and a lot of times they don't want to look at the numbers. And we talk about all the time revenue, profit, cash flow. I mean, I learned the hard way. Like you said earlier, failure is usually our number one teacher. I learned the hard way in my first business because I was the checkbook accounting person. I would look at the checkbook, and basically I was borrowing from tomorrow's revenue to pay today's bills. And those pitfalls stick with you. And so that's a big thing that I try to teach my clients. And obviously, like you said, it's one of the key reasons that businesses do not sell.
Correct. So the next key kind of test that we get questions on is, what's the owner's role and responsibility in the company? And that is called the degree of owner dependency. So if that business owner is the key provider or owner of critical knowledge in the company, or type of business, if they are the primary creative mind in the company, that's a red flag for buyers, because buyers, ironically, are open to risk in that they're willing to buy at the same time very risk averse. So they do everything they can to mitigate the risk when they buy a business. So if the owner is the key source of knowledge or talent, and even worse, if they are the key customer contact or the key business development person, that creates significant owner dependency. And one of the questions we ask the owners when we're considering representing them is, when was the last time you took a vacation? And if an owner kind of laughs and says, oh, I haven't taken a vacation in years, that's a major red flag. If the owner tells me they're calling me from a vacation home in Florida, or the client right now, he spent 2.5 weeks off the grid in Africa hunting, that's a good sign that the business is not solely dependent on that business owner. And with that in mind, and based on kind of your audience profile and who you consult with, this is a true story of the first client I had at Raincatcher. This gentleman owned a small marketing, creative services, and premiums and incentive business based in Michigan. And he was incredibly creative, super cool guy. I liked him a lot. And he had won many awards. And he had his clients a large multi-location hospital chain in the region. And that client represented 50% of his total business. So that's what we call customer dependency. And business buyers, by and large, won't consider buying a business that has more than 20% customer concentration. We brought this gentleman, and again, he was the key creative. He was the key point of customer contact. And as I mentioned, he'd won all kinds of creative awards. And when we went to sell his company, we brought him 6 offers for his business. All were competitively priced, but none of them offered any cash on closing the sale, which is extremely unusual. And they wanted him to stay on board in an employee capacity for 2 to 3 years, which was completely counter to his objective in selling the company and retiring. And he got very angry, and he turned down all 6 offers. And I stayed in touch with him, and 6 months later, his argument was that he didn't have just one customer in this hospital chain. He had like 30 plus customers because he made calls on each of the individual locations. But the senior management of the hospital chain was changed out. And what happens when new management comes in? They
Right.
bring in their own people. And like that, he lost 50% of his business, and he was completely unsellable at that point. So you've got owner dependency and you've got customer concentration, which are critical benchmarks that buyers look at in any business.
Wow. And, I've heard of very large businesses going under for the same reason. They had all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. So that's really interesting. You brought up something that I think is key to talk about, and that is owner identity. As business owners, our identity is often locked into what we do, our business. That's how people in the community know us. And what do you see? Do you see that as a block for people selling? Do they have a hard time letting go emotionally of that owner identity?
Some of them do. You're right. It is their baby. They eat, sleep, and breathe their business. And people who don't own companies don't really realize that owning a business or being the CEO of a company, it's lonely at the top, and it's just a 24/7, 365 job. And, it's like, when you bring in buyers, and this is one of the key reasons why there's tremendous return on investment for these owners when they want to sell, to bring in professional expertise to represent them. Because an investment bank like ourselves, we take the emotions out of it. We're strictly running a business transaction, but at the same time, we play a critical role in what I kind of jokingly call the Dr. Phil role. Selling a company for those reasons is an emotional roller coaster ride for these business owners. It's fraught with various emotions and thoughts. And what am I going to do after I retire? Or, if there are some wrinkles in the business, they take it personally. It's like somebody calling their baby ugly. That's where our role comes in, to diffuse that and help reset that and give them the context that they're going to need, because selling a business, if you want to sell your company and want me to represent you, as you said, Jennifer, you said, Cam, let's get started. So we have a signed an engagement. It's going to be 9 to 10 months before that deal closes. And that's a national average for the duration of time it takes to sell a company. Doesn't matter what size the business or what industry.
Mm.
So that's the norm. And buyers wake up and they want, an immediate solution, and it's just not there. So they get fatigue. Selling a business is a full-time job on top of a full-time job. So a big part of our role is to navigate and help them through that process, because sometimes they can become their own worst enemy. And I've had to talk business owners down off the ledge because they just reached a point where they said, forget it. I'm done. I'm not going to do this. So yeah, they need to understand that, and they
Right.
need to begin having plan for their life post closing, because many business owners get excited. I'm going to get a big check in my bank and life's going to be good. But because it's their primary purpose in life, it's their ego validation, it's their primary source of relationships through interaction with other people, whether
Mhm.
they're employees or customers. Wake up one day and they suddenly have no purpose. But interestingly, they're very prone to taking risks to build their company. But once they sell it, they become extremely risk averse, and they are unwilling to go out and reinvest any of that money they just made. So many of them take a long period of time to transition into not having that kind of a role where they matter, where they're calling the shots, and where they have a daily purpose.
Yeah, I can see why. And I'm actually surprised that it only takes 9 to 10 months to sell a business, to be honest with you.
Well, certainly there are exceptions. Few sell faster. Many take a longer period of time. As business during the course of our marketing process kind of softened based on, macro market dynamics. So we pulled back and took the company off the market as the economy improves. This is in the residential housing industry, and we'll go back to market again. That will probably take 2 years or more for them to get an optimum valuation for their company once we can demonstrate that the business has fully recovered. So yeah, things happen during the process. It's key to keep the business on a consistent financial performance track during the marketing and sales process, and that can definitely slow things down.
So you brought up something, we talked a lot about the owner identity. So let's talk about seeing the owner stay in the business post sale. When I sold my business of 20 years, I stayed on as a consultant for a year. That was part of our agreement. And that can be a tricky road as well, because personally, I'm trying to let go and let the new owner take over. But then at the same time, you're trying to help them succeed and see the pitfalls they might be heading because they've got new ideas. It's emotional. It's hard. How many of the deals that you structure are you seeing the owner stay around, and what do you recommend for the owner once they sell?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, Jennifer, when I was on the buy side doing 50 deals, we would integrate those into our larger parent company. And most often the owner would stay on for some period of time. And of course, most owners sell because they want to ultimately exit. Some owners just want to take some chips off the table. So they reduce or diversify their financial profile or portfolio, and they'll stay on for sometimes 3 to 5 years. What we see today is in this deal size range, where the companies we represent sell kind of in a window of 5 million to roughly 30 million in what we refer to as enterprise value. That's the total purchase price. Many of those companies are acquired by financial buyers, particularly private equity. And private equity buyers like to see the owner stay on, and oftentimes will improve the valuation for that factor. And they ask those owners to roll over part of the purchase price into equity in the buying company, which is referred to as a platform company, which for many of those business owners can be a fantastic financial investment. Typically, the private equity firms ask them to roll over 20% of the purchase price into equity into their platform company. And I've seen many cases where when the private equity firm sells the full platform portfolio, those owners make more on the 20% of the business that they didn't sell than on the 80% of the business that they did sell. I had a former consulting partner that sold his company 20 plus years ago, and he sold 100% of it and turned down the offer to roll over equity. And to this day, he still kicks himself because that platform play had an exponential return on it. And he would have made millions more if he had simply taken the rollover. But he was burnt out. He wanted to retire. He did a brief transition period and he was out. But he still kicks himself for it. Lunch with him a
Yeah.
week ago, and he brings it up almost every time.
I'm sure. Well, hindsight's 2020, and like you said earlier, that group tends to be a little more risk averse. So apparently,
Yeah.
he just wanted to move on. One last question about structuring deals. What are your thoughts on seller financing?
Well, it's a very common way to get a deal done today. When interest rates really ballooned up, we saw more and more of that. So a typical deal structure today, most business owners have never sold a company before. Again, why it's good to have professional representation. I've always been a believer in know what you know how to do well and do it. Know what you don't know how to do well and hire an expert to do it for you. So deal structures can be far more complicated today, especially with higher interest rates. So again, in this deal size category, it is not uncommon for the buyer to ask the owner to roll over a portion of the sales price as equity in the new platform and to do what we call carry back a seller note, which is essentially loaning the buyer part of the purchase price. And those are typically structured on a 3 to 5 year payback. Could be, market interest rates, lately could be 6 or 7% interest on that money. Could be no interest payments or principal payments for the first year. They get structured differently, but there's a second advantage to that most sellers don't realize, that if part of the purchase price is structured as a seller note, then they're not going to pay capital gains taxes on that sale of the business. So it can help from a personal tax liability planning standpoint as well. So we navigate through all of that complexity with our clients.
So, Cameron, this has been really, really good information. And like you had mentioned a few times, you don't just go into selling your business very quickly and without a lot of thought. And we talked a lot about what can go wrong and how sellers can end up leaving money on the table. So what do you want any business owner, like let's take the business owner that's 5 years in. They've made it 5 years, they're building a business. They have no idea when they want to exit. Right now they still love what they do. They're making money, it's going well. What do you want them to really know and take away from this conversation?
Yeah. Well, they definitely need to begin planning. When we're talking with potential clients, we consider it absolutely, frankly, unethical to try to convince a business owner to sell. What we try to do is provide them with the information they need to make arguably the biggest decision in their lives. It's where their source of generational wealth is going to be. So they need to know the pros and cons of that process. But as I said early on, they're going to exit. They're either going to leave of their own volition or they may leave horizontal someday. And I've seen many sad situations where the owner put off structuring an exit and maybe they got hit by the proverbial bus. I saw one come down sadly with cancer with a very short lifespan. And then not only are their family members and their loved ones left with the devastation of losing a patriarch or matriarch of whomever this individual might be, and everything we all have to navigate through when a loved one dies. And suddenly on top of that, they have to deal with, what do I do with this company? Usually, we don't see many cases where both spouses are in the business and the spouse may have no clue what goes on in that business or how to manage it. And I saw a case with an HVAC business, for example, in the Northeast where that did occur. And because there was this instant vacuum and the employees had no leadership, didn't know where to go, and they had some of their route repair people had good customer relationships, and they just simply left and started their own new company. And tragically, this company just collapsed on itself. So the family not only lost their husband and father, they lost the entire business and their source of future generational wealth. It's just a key consideration because we never know.
This to me was a very powerful conversation because I talk to a lot of business owners who don't have a 401k. Their retirement plan is selling the business. And I
Exactly.
hope that everybody listening today realizes that this is a journey that you should not do alone. We need to bring in experts like yourself and bring in experts like myself who can help you get your business running properly. And it's never too soon to start the plan to exit because that just is freedom. Like I say, a lot of people start a business because they want freedom, flexibility. They want the autonomy of owning their own business. Well, when you're not planning the exit, you're losing the freedom and the choice that you get to make and on the timing that you get. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. What is the best place to get a hold of you if someone is interested in learning more about your services?
Yeah, absolutely. They could reach me at cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com. And of course, our website is raincatcher.com. It can easily be messaged on LinkedIn as well. And as you heard me mention, we don't try to sell anybody anything. We do try to educate. I'm happy to talk to any of your listeners if they just want to bounce some ideas off or get some further guidance. And if they're ready to sell, of course, I'd really love to talk to them because that's our specialty is selling companies.
Thank you so much for your education and your ability to be available. And I will definitely put the show notes to get a hold of Cameron. I'll put the links in the show notes. So thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. Pleasure to be here.
So here's what I really want to leave you with. One day, by choice or by circumstances, you will leave your business. And the question isn't if that happens, it's whether your business will be ready when you are. What you heard today wasn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up in the best possible way. Because exit ready isn't about selling. It's about freedom. It's about choice. You are working so hard every day to build something. So let's make sure we build it all the way to the end. And the truth that Cameron and I both know, and we've seen firsthand over and over and over, is that you don't prepare for an exit at the finish line. You prepare now in the quiet. The systems, your finances, your leadership, your time, your owner dependency. Before you ever sit across the table from someone like Cameron, you need your business strong on the inside, and that's the work I love to do. I help you build a business that pays you well, runs without burning out, doesn't collapse every time you take a vacation, and gives you real options whenever you're ready. So if this episode made you think, if something happened tomorrow, I'm not sure my business would survive without me, that's not failure. That's an invitation to start building a little differently, more intentional, more profitable, and with your future in mind. Because when your business is ready on the inside, then the conversation like this one turns into real freedom on the outside. If you are in need of this assistance, reach out to me today. Let's have a conversation so that I can help you prepare for whatever the next win is around the corner for you. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave a 5-star review and leave a few comments on this episode. I would love to hear how this resonated with you. Until next time, keep building and support your local businesses.